Hello, everyone, for my third time. I promise I won't repeat that again. My name's Chris Martinez, and I'm the mayor of Gadventures. And you're probably thinking, well, what's a mayor and why does a company have one? And am I on the right call right now? Yes, you're on the right call. I'm the mayor of Gadventures, and all that means is I have the fantastic privilege of championing our really passionate, purpose-driven culture here at Gadventures. And every once in a while, I do get the opportunity to join fine folks like you for really interesting conversations like the one we're about to have right now. And on that note, I think we should go ahead and get this party started. So I do want to say a massive welcome to everyone who's joining us today from around the world. We're expecting about 500 people to join us today. So we want to send a massive a welcome and a hello to all of our friends in Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And we've got some global representation here with friends joining us from places like Nigeria, Jamaica, and Kyrgyzstan. So welcome to everyone. We do want to sincerely thank all of you for joining us today. And we hope that you and your families are safe and well at this time. And we appreciate you taking your really valued time to join us today for the latest in our series of Retravel Live virtual events, addressing how we can reshape travel on the other side of this pandemic. Today, we're focusing on community tourism and its power to help change the world when we head back out to explore again. Now, before we get started, I do want to give a couple housekeeping items just to make sure we have the best possible experience today. So the first thing is that we've collected all of your questions in advance, and we're going to do our very best to address as many of those as possible throughout the content of today's conversation. Now, if you didn't have an opportunity to ask a question, or maybe you're inspired by something that you hear throughout the course of the conversation, no worries at all, because we're going to be taking some additional questions in the question and answer section of Zoom. So that should appear towards the bottom of your screen. If you're thinking of anything, go ahead and drop a question in the Q&A section. In addition to that, we recommend that everyone selects fit to window in the viewing options, just to make sure we can get all of the panelists in the shot and you get all of the action. And finally, we want to let you know that we'll be recording today's session. So if you need to step away for a moment, if you really like something and you want to refer back to it, we are going to make that available to all of you, and we'll be posting that to our YouTube channel shortly. On that note, we're done with the housekeeping items. Let me go ahead and get into some introductions. So first, I'd like to introduce our host and moderator today, Bruce Poon Tip. Bruce is the author of Looptail and is an entrepreneur and philanthropist, but you might know him best as a pioneer of community tourism and the founder of Gadventures, which was founded 30 years ago. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Great to see you. Joining Bruce today, we have Audrey Scott. Audrey is the co-founder of Uncornered Market and is a Gadventures wanderer. Audrey is based in Berlin and works with travel brands and destinations to create, position, and market community-based sustainable travel experiences. The Uncornered Market blog advocates for responsible, respectful travel that cares for our planet and its people. Together with her husband, Dan, Audrey has been traveling the world for more than 20 years. Welcome, Audrey.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Joining us today, we also have Judy Kefrigona, who's the Director of Sustainable Travel and Tourism Agenda. Based in Nairobi, Judy's the founder of STTA, a Pan-African organization that's working to shape a sustainable future for Africa's tourism. She's a thought leader in sustainable tourism and sustainable community development with more than 20 years experience. Last year, she received the Responsible Tourism Legacy Award from Crest and was named among the top 40 global shakers in sustainable tourism. Welcome, Judy. We've also got joining us today, last but absolutely not least, we've got Jamie Sweeting joining us today, who's the president of the Planeterra Foundation. And over the past 25 years, Jamie has built a career centered around achieving sustainable development and conservation through tourism. Jamie believes strongly in the power of travel to improve people's lives, particularly marginalized women, disadvantaged youth, and indigenous communities. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone.
Great to see you. And on that note, I am going to fade into this mountain, pass it over to Bruce to get this conversation started. Thank you all.
Good morning, good afternoon, and I guess good evening for some people. Very excited about this conversation. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome, everybody. Today we have, besides from being all over the world, we have sellers of travel, we have travelers themselves, customers of travel, we have operators, we have just general people who are just interested in the topic, educators. It's quite an exciting group, and I still see people are filing in, so that's pretty exciting. This is a very important conversation. I'm very happy to have some of my favorite people. Judy, I don't know you well, but I'm a super big fan of your work. So let's get this party started, or this discussion started. So I want to start actually by defining tourism, because as human beings, we like to define things. And over the last, in Gadventures kind of history, which is 31 years now, tourism has evolved from the mid-90s of ecotourism, and then to responsible tourism, and then sustainable tourism. And now we kind of have ethical tourism, green tourism. There just seems to be so many definitions of what tourism is. And now today we're talking about community tourism. But before we get there, I think it's very confusing to travelers when there's so many definitions. Maybe Jamie, I'm going to start with you, because I know you know, because you've been through that evolution of travel with me, because we've known each other for so long. What is the difference, or how do you define these definitions between eco, responsible, sustainable, ethical, green? What's the difference between those types of travel?
I mean, I think for me, Bruce, it's really looking at the beneficiaries, right? I think, ecotourism was really about, when we first met, I was working for Conservation International in the mid-90s, and we were trying to use tourism as a vehicle to achieve biodiversity conservation. So that's really, I think, where the ecotourism movement came from, was largely, the conservation community. I think, we've seen these other, terms, sustainable and responsible travel, which seem to be more about how corporations can do the right thing and improve the way they manage travel and provide travel. For me, community tourism is really about, it being owned, led, and run by communities. The beneficiaries of travel are the host communities that are welcoming you into the place they call home. It also doesn't necessarily have to just be geographic, I think. I think of some of the Planeterra project communities that we have, and we have differently abled cafes in Iceland and in Hungary. We work with refugee communities in Europe, in Italy and Spain, and we work with women's empowerment NGOs. So I think the communities, while they can be geographic, they can also be thematic as well.
And Judy, I'm going to go to you on a little bit on the same question, just from your view in Africa. Between ecotourism, responsible travel to sustainable tourism, there was obviously originally started with a focus on environment that happened in the mid-90s, and then it moved into people, and people never thought of connecting poverty alleviation or community development with tourism. Maybe you can give some, what your thoughts on that change over the last 20 years.
Thank you very much. When it comes to definitions, it's always a very interesting discussion in tourism because of the different perspectives, how you look at the definition of ecotourism as a traveler, as a community, as a tour operator, as a development practitioner. And it's interesting what Jamie has said, that in the mid-90s, ecotourism was almost hijacked by conservation organizations, and it became a tool for protecting the environment, for pushing for the protection of the environment. And whereas there was the connection with people, the connection to people was almost lost during that time. And if you look at a lot of companies, tourism businesses in Africa that embraced ecotourism at that particular time, you will realize that they put a lot of investment in environmental protection. You come across many reports about restoration of environment, restoration of species, specific species protection, cross-boundary partnerships for species protection, and a lot of tourism businesses putting a lot of effort in that particular area. And I think it has got a lot to do with how ecotourism was defined from the beginning. It was travel to these remote areas that benefits communities and protects the environment. And so for the conservation world, they picked the protects the environment is what they pushed as ecotourism. And because that definition was very specific about respecting cultures, a lot of other tourism organizations started locking in community tourism or ecotourism into little efforts that were going to give benefits to communities through cultures. So it was still looking at communities, what I described today as when I look at ecotourism or sustainable tourism then and now, it was like they are attractions and we're going to respect them. When we go to them, we'll respect how we see them, and it almost puts communities made communities passive and tourism, so community tourism as passive tourism, where communities were just recipients of guests who come to see them and have to respect them as they see them. Now that has changed over time, but it has taken a long time for a lot of other businesses to see the community in a wider perspective, to start seeing them as co-creators of experiences and not as part of attraction, but actually the hosts of guests that come to them, and they are the owners of experiences and can work with tourism businesses to co-create experiences to meet sometimes the traveler's demand. And that is not about, because when I say that, sometimes people say, but that affects authenticity. And I always say the owner of authenticity is the community. When they think it is right for them, when they accept it, and it has been a co-creation with them, it is an experience that they are offering. And not every experience that a community offers should be put on the scale of authenticity, because communities change and evolve over time. There are things that will remain authentic, but there are things that will be co-created as communities interact with the rest of the world. And these are the things that now they offer together with tour operators, and they should not be judged harshly on the scale of authenticity.
Great, excellent points. I'm going to move on to, I'm going to go to you, Audrey, now, but Gadventures, we never identified with ecotourism specifically, elements of it. I remember it being actually somewhat of a confusing for us as an operator, because we were getting lumped in the mid-90s as an eco-tour company, and then a responsible tour company, and then sustainable tour company. And so we really I just want to touch on this before we, because this is all about community tourism, but I want to touch, because we really identified with being, a social enterprise, and how social enterprise was the first definition for me of how you brought community into a dialogue of tourism, and how it wasn't a one-way relationship with local people and communities. It was a dialogue between communities, and that's when, so social enterprise was kind of our first, introduction to that. We kind of, early wanted to redefine what that meant in the tourism space. So I come to you, Audrey, and maybe you can give some thoughts on, how you think, social enterprise kind of fits into these definitions of tourism.
Great question. I'm a big advocate for the social enterprise model. We've been fortunate to see quite a few really fabulous social enterprises around the world. But I think the way that it connects is, it builds on what, Judy and Jamie have said, in terms of, this is a model of tourism where there really is shared value and shared benefit. I think first it has to come from the community, like Judy was mentioning, in terms of what they want to share, the type of tourism they want to develop, the type of travelers they want, and working with them to help create these experiences that really provide a connection between travelers and the communities, to the people, to the place, to the history, to the architecture, to the food. But then also for the communities, this understanding that there's also a connection to the travelers. And I think we all know from experiences, a lot of local people do love connecting and meeting travelers, because that also enriches their lives. But then the social enterprise or the community tourism aspect is so important because that money and that benefit is also going back into that community. So in social enterprises, often they have a mission, maybe it might be connected to a marginalized community or education or environment. And so the money earned from tourism goes back also to support other community initiatives and other community projects that are identified as important and really necessary by the community. So I see it as kind of a three-way benefit, also between the companies who are offering these tours because they're helping to make the connection between travelers and the communities.
Excellent. Excellent, just going over how we've defined history, also tourism in the most recent 20, 25 years as we land on community tourism. So, we decided we wanted to define community tourism a few years ago at Gadventures on how we interpret it, because we never really identified with a lot of the others. And not that we didn't identify with, parts of these kind of definitions, but people have a need to kind of define what we do constantly as opposed to, just we run great tours. But at the same time, we got so attached to the social enterprise side. I want to talk about community tourism, which we started, a couple of years ago, which was kind of, when we started, we researched a few years ago, really didn't have a clear definition of what it is. And we wanted to kind of, take that space and make it, what we interpret it for ourselves. Maybe quickly, I'm going to go through all of you and quickly, because we have a lot to cover and I've got so many great questions. It's a broad concept, community tours. I'm just curious to know from each of you quickly, how would you define it? I'll start with you, Jamie.
Yeah, as I said, I think for me, it's all about ownership and agency. I think it's about the communities owning, leading, running the experiences themselves, and essentially, as Judy said, hosting guests. So for me, that's really what it's all about. It's about tourism as a vehicle to improve livelihoods of the host communities.
And how about you, Judy? What does community tourism mean to you?
For me, community tourism is community by and with community for community benefit. So it's a tourism by the community or with the community because they can partner. So it can be by themselves or with somebody else, by community with community for community benefit.
Okay, and Audrey.
I'll try not to repeat because both of these have been great definitions. I was just going to add that in terms of the benefit, also thinking about it in terms of not just economic, but also cultural exchange, preservation, and also environmental conservation. And also when I think of the benefit primarily should be focused on the community, but I also think of the benefit to travelers and taking that connection back home with them to their own community at home. So I also think of it a little bit in two-way.
Excellent. Excellent setup. I know I'm the moderator, so supposed to be asking the questions, but from a corporate view, from the Gadventures tour operator view, community tourism for us was always about bringing everyone into the story, not just the traveler, because we were constantly creating experiences for travelers and creating a one-way experience and a one-way conversation. It was always our goal to bring everyone in the conversation and anyone who touches our brand to build a community around a travel experience. And it's anyone who touches our brand, because that includes our employees here in Toronto, in Boston, in London, in Australia, wherever they are, but also the operators, everyone who our customers, and building a bigger community. And then the other kind of side definition for us is bringing people to places to communities that would not normally not benefit from travel. Because everyone wants to go to Peru, or they want to go to Machu Picchu, or they want to go to Africa, and they want to go to the Masai Mara. But we wanted to take people off those tracks and into communities that offered rich experiences for people in a cultural exchange way, but also offered a community experience where people would benefit from tourism that normally wouldn't benefit because they're not on the track of tourism. So yeah, so that kind of frames what we're doing. But at Gadventures, we often talk about wealth distribution, poverty alleviation, and how travel can be a vehicle to alleviate poverty. And I'm curious to hear from others, and I'll start with you, Judy, on this topic. In terms of the travel being a vehicle, a powerful vehicle for wealth distribution, and maybe you can explain how to this diverse audience we have, your views on that.
Thank you very much. Yes, community tourism is a way of redistributing wealth to communities that would otherwise will not benefit from tourism that goes to mainstream destinations. And I believe this is what gave birth to the concept of traveler's philanthropy. This concept is almost lost in communication today, but it was a very powerful concept that brought together, puts a name to an action that communities and many businesses were already involved in when they were taking travelers to communities off the beaten path and taking them out there to meet with communities. It did emerge in those days that when travelers connect with people, and I've always said this, that for me, people travel to meet people. They don't travel to see things. They travel to meet people. And community tourism provides that experience far much closer. I know when you stay in a big hotel, you still meet people who live in that city who serve you. But when you go into a community and sit under the trees with them, next to their houses with them, and share their meals with them, it's a very different, real setting. So people travel to see people. And during these travels, you find that when people connect with people, they can see, they can almost emotionally connect with places, and they are moved to do something. Now, when it is not, when this giving or this move to do something is not properly organized, it can lead to chaotic charity. But if it is nurtured properly, and we have seen that where travelers' philanthropy is nurtured properly, it has made significant contributions in communities. So I believe that community tourism can create wealth for communities, not just directly from tourism revenue, but also through travelers' philanthropy, which is a very, very powerful tool for connecting with communities.
Excellent. Excellent points. I'm going to ask you, Audrey, about, why is it important to visit local communities rather than just donate money for education or healthcare, etc.? Why is it actually important for travelers to actually visit?
Well, just building on what Judy just said in terms of the connection to people. And I think when travelers go to a place, they share a meal, they stay in a home, perhaps, there is such a strong connection to that people, to the local people there, to the culture, to the place. And that care grows. It's kind of like when you have, when you've smelled and you've tasted and you've had all the sensory experiences, you have this care about the place and you take that back home with you as well. And even though donations to hospitals and NGOs and stuff are also incredibly important, it's not quite the same tangible it's not quite the same effect as sharing that experience together. And for the local communities also, when travelers visit, this also provides a more, let's say, continual source of income, a source of exchange, source of connection, that it's not just a one-time thing or it's not just every now and then, but it's growing and it's building. And when it's done by the community, meaning they're deciding how they want their tourism to develop, then it's done in a way that the community also decides what they want to share. And it also develops a lot of pride in terms of their local culture and their nature and their history and everything else. So I think it's that connection of when you're actually there with people.
That's excellent. Judy, I'm going to go back to you quickly because you mentioned something about, this is kind of off script for this again, but it was one of my questions I was hoping we would get to, just to throw this in, because I often talk about the difference between compassion and charity. And how travelers, especially when they want to do something, you touched on it, but maybe I can just give you a second here to talk about what that means to you and the difference in the field, because I'm always stressing that we're taught to be charitable, but there's a different level of meaning when it comes to compassion. Can you add anything to that?
Yes, thank you very much. I always say that charity is good, but charity has got its place. Charity is less transformative. Charity gives pride, more pride and value to the giver than it transforms or reaches the heart of the recipient. Compassion is long-term. It's an investment of your own feelings or your own values or your own money or your own time into something that you value. You cannot have compassion for something that you don't value, but you can contribute charity to something that you get in, for a moment of excitement and a moment of engagement. So there is a lot of charity that goes on that does not benefit communities because it is one-off givings that satisfies the person who is giving. The person takes the pride with it, that I gave and this is what I did. And there's a little thought about the long-term impact of that giving. And I will give an example, and I don't want it to be taken out of context. And sometimes I do say this, that it is a nice thing to travel to a village in Africa or Asia or anywhere and see the school and see the walls of the school that don't look so clean. And you offer charitable giving to paint the walls. And I say, you are painting the walls for a child that doesn't have a pen, that doesn't have a book. That is how charity works. Because the paint looks good and it is easy for immediate gratification out of charity. You can take a picture of a wall that has been painted and you identify with it. But it takes long-term engagement with a community to transform the children who don't have their pens and need books and all that, for you to see the results and be able to report on the impact. So people who love, sometimes people do charity, maybe they don't know, they have not been told the difference, but compassion is a long-term engagement, emotional engagement, and compassion pushes you to ask more questions. You will ask more questions. Is the wall more important? Is that what they really need right now? Compassion will seek you, will move you to want to find out what transformation will happen. Compassion will push you to ask the right questions, whether this is what is valuable for these people at this particular time or this community at this particular time. And so the box of charity is very attractive because of the things that I have just said, immediate gratification of the person who does it without much thought of the long-term impact and whether you're creating any difference at all.
That is like the best answer to that question I have ever had. And I've actually asked that to the Dalai Lama, okay? So that was unbelievable, Judy. So thank you for that. Check. Jamie, we're gonna go to you and we're going to talk about the responsibility. I'm gonna move over to another topic. How much responsibility should lie with the traveler and how much should lie with the travel companies to ensure local people benefit from community tourism?
Yeah, hard to follow Judy there. Thanks, Judy. That was fantastic. I think, everything, it's weird. To me, everything starts with the community, but in this case, everything starts with the traveler. Ultimately, it's the traveler who is deciding where they want to spend their discretionary income to go on a trip, and how they want to travel and where they want that money to go. And I think that not enough travelers fully recognize the power that they have, that power of the wallet, if it were. They can influence travel companies to be the ones that are integrating, meaningful community tourism experiences into their itineraries and their product offerings. So I do think that it starts first and foremost with travelers, seeking out these kinds of experiences, and demanding of the travel companies that they work with to include these experiences. I also think that travel companies need to step up as well and engage in working with communities and building these experiences. And as you've all said, it's a partnership. It's a vehicle of exchange, of trade, not aid, and really it's about empowerment on both sides. But ultimately, I mean, the reason I'm so passionate about this, having been doing it for 26 years, is and probably more passionate now than I ever have been, is it's just a better experience for the traveler. It's absolutely a better experience for the community. And if the community is winning and the traveler is winning, then the travel companies themselves are going to win too.
Excellent. I'm going to go to you, Audrey. And over the past 10 months, just touching in on, we can't deny the fact we're in a pandemic. We haven't touched on that yet. We've gone from talk of over tourism just prior to March 13th to under tourism to no tourism. With so many people now wanting to visit remote places, how can we ensure a balance in rural communities? I mean, as we're pushing into more remote areas, and I guess the feeling is on the other side of this pandemic, more and more people will want to be outdoors, or will change their patterns and hopefully become more purposeful and meaningful in their decisions on why they want to travel. But as they push into more remote areas, more rural communities, how do we keep and engage in positive impact and not overwhelm and not because over tourism to a small community, 30 people coming regularly to a community before there's cultural impact. What can we do? What can we do to as more and more people push into more remote areas?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask the community what they want, because I know we've done a lot of work in kind of remote rural areas, and it's understanding or asking what the community wants, but also explaining what some of the implications are of having more visitors. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes people are like, oh, the more the merrier. But we all know that there's impacts on those local communities. So I think it also comes down to local communities understanding the impacts of when there are too many travelers, and potentially putting in some restrictions in terms of how many people maybe can visit certain natural areas, because if they are fragile, they could be destroyed. It also means travelers, or also communities educating travelers on the impact of their visit. And the reason why I say that is, at first when I heard that so many people were going off into national parks and the great outdoors, I was like, great, this is, in the last few months or last 10 months. But then I realized a lot of the people actually didn't understand that they needed to stay on the trail and they needed to take the garbage out with them. So I think also travel companies, if travelers are traveling with a travel company, have the responsibility of educating the travelers on the impact that they have and trying to reduce that as much as possible. And for communities also to work with the travelers and the visitors they have to explain how they can reduce their footprint. But it's tough because a lot of communities are hoping to get travelers back. And I think it's hard to figure out what is that fine line where there's enough travelers that, support the local businesses and allow for growth, but then also don't hurt the environment and also don't kind of overwhelm the local community that's there.
Excellent. Jamie, I'm going to go to you with this one, just staying a bit on the topic of, the COVID and how it's impacted travel in general, but also communities. What has it meant for communities that rely on tourism? You're in touch with a lot of the projects on the ground. Have they had to pivot as a result for survival? And will they still be there when travel returns?
Yes, they will be there. And yes, they want travelers. I think to answer the previous question and this one at the same time, and to us, it's all about agency. It's about, ultimately the decision of whether or not, travelers should go and visit local communities should be the community's decision and not ours as NGOs or travel companies. I mean, obviously travelers have to make their own decisions, but I think our job as NGOs and travel companies and consultants and experts is to make sure that we're providing communities with the resources to be able to make informed decisions about what is right for them as communities. A lot of, we work with over 120 communities in over 60 countries now as Planeterra, and a lot of them really struggled with the initial global shutdown. A lot of them, did that famous 2020 word of pivot, and we were able to, thanks to the generosity of our supporters, many of whom are travelers. We were able to give out 30 emergency grants to help with those basic needs that were needed in the direct aftermath of the cut in international travel. So food and medicine and things like that. But the majority of the work that we've been doing with communities has been about enabling them to see who they want to be when this comes out, and when travel starts up again. A lot of them have realized that they had become a bit too over reliant on tourism, and moving forward they want to have a more equitable share of how their economy works. So they've gone back to having community gardens or doing agriculture or aquaculture. That doesn't mean that they don't want to do tourism. They absolutely do, but they realize, particularly in the light of climate change, and they know that things are going to be changing in their communities. They want to diversify their incomes. So yeah, overwhelmingly, the vast majority of our community partners are eager and ready and waiting. They've done a lot of training and capacity building about how to run safe experiences in the COVID era. Mask wearing and social distancing and doing as much things outside as they possibly can. But I think the sad thing is that the vast majority of our communities are desperate to have travelers come back in, not least because they just love having people come and experience their nature and culture, and it gives them a huge amount of pride.
Excellent. I'm going to stay with you on this one, Jamie, and this is just about the cost, because there's talk about, the cost of travel on the other side. A lot of times it's regarding airfares and getting people in destination with a limited capacity. But should just pondering, should the cost of travel increase in the name of conservation? And I say this as a company for 30 years that has had to do great work and also cost the same. We always have to do the work that we do on the ground, but the consumer wants us to be competitive cost-wise. But should travel increase in the name of conservation and to support cultures?
Yes. However, it's a willingness to pay, right? I mean, it's all very well. I've spent the majority of my career in the non-profit sector, and it's very easy for us NGO folks to say, raise the price, give communities more. At the end of the day, it's a business, and it's the willingness to pay of the consumer, and so we can't be naive about this stuff. I do think that the travel industry is now is a time of reckoning, and can we build in full cost accounting into everything? I mean, there's been some excellent work done on one report, the invisible burden of travel, and how we don't fully account for the true costs of the negative impacts of travel. Look, there's nothing I would like more than to be able to have communities get twice as much money for what they're offering today. And I think that would still be a bargain. But at the very least, I think travel companies need to be committed to fair, livable, equitable wages, and not paying people less than what they are able to survive on. And I think if you're going to call yourself a responsible travel company, you have to hold yourself accountable to at least doing that.
Excellent. Judy, to you on this question, and this is a very big one, as we kind of zoom out a bit because we have agents here today, we have travelers, but also operators and tour operators. And you know, when poverty is a daily reality for local people, they're vulnerable to commercial exploitation because they just want to help their families or their communities. And they're, you know, they're just looking for opportunities. And so I just, maybe you could give some advice to tour operators out there that are, you know, want to do good or want to do something, and how, you know, how do they avoid that kind of Western savior approach to kind of creating experiences and creating a more equitable relationship on the ground?
I think there is no better way than making it clear to both parties, which is your communities that you're working with. It's something I always call the engagement question, right?
Uh-huh.
Is it so clear to the communities why you are engaging? What is the engagement question? What is the thing that you truly, without having some cards under the seat, under the table, that they are all clear that this engagement is about trade, but this engagement has the opportunity to open doors for other things? Because I said earlier on that one of the benefits and the things that I value community tourism for is that it opens up the world to communities that would probably have waited 20, 50 years for government services, especially in some of the developing countries. Things that would have taken a long time to come to them. Community tourism and the people they get to interact with open these opportunities. But this is not to patronize them just because of their vulnerable situations. To go into an effective engagement with the community, the first thing you have to define is, some people call it the engagement vision. I call it the engagement question, because when you ask it in a question form, it's easier for communities to relate with it. What will our engagement translate to? If you ask that question, the community will pour out their current status and issues and say, for us, an effective engagement is an engagement that will respect our cultures, but will enable us to open opportunities for trade, that will enable us to have access to education, that will enable us to have access to clean water. But even as we have that access to clean water, we want these considerations in that access to clean water. Now, without a question, if you make it a statement of a vision, you do not open yourself up for integration and for inclusion of other people's points of view. If you ask an engagement question, then you open it up. Your funnel is more widely open than when you come up with a statement and say, this is the vision for engagement with this community, but this is the question that we ask the community as we engage with them.
Excellent, Judy, thank you. So I'm gonna, I got a couple more questions, and we have to get to audience questions. We have a terrible habit with these Retravel live presentations to go over time. I'm trying to keep our time tight here. And the conversation is so rich. I'm loving this. And thank you for all of your insightful answers. I want to get back to now, or get to some advice for people that are traveling in the future. But one of the things I wanted to just touch base before we get there is, you know, one of the things I get asked the most, or we get asked the most, and I can actually see some of the questions that are coming today, is about ethics. The idea of ethics in travel. And one of the big ones that's coming up is, as an operator, I want people to travel as quickly as possible. I want to get my business out of hibernation. So I've got my own motivation. But, you know, the questions of ethics is going to come, is something that's going to be something we have to talk about. And in some cases, you know, travelers going to areas that don't have access to the vaccines as quickly as others. And in some cases, due to politics or even, you know, denying its even existence, and some countries not having the access that we're going to have in that short-term kind of start of travel. You know, Jamie, maybe I can just ask you quickly if you have any thoughts on that and the ethics of travel in the next, you know, this coming year in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, as I said, I think it's the communities that need to decide, who can come in and who can't. I think we as travel companies can certainly, be there and be supportive if the decision is no, they don't want travelers right now. We need to help, make that a comfortable, no, because, we also have to recognize that in most cases the travel company is in a different discussion perspective than the community is, and therefore a lot of communities feel pressure to oh, if I say no, does that mean this company will never come back? And we need to be reassuring on those sorts of things to enable that agency that I'm talking about. In our communication and conversations that we're having with our community partners across the world, the vast majority of them, they want travelers, and so they think that it is ethically right to do so. I think ultimately it's an individual decision for a traveler to decide, do they want to go to a remote indigenous community and what behaviors are they going to take if they are going to do that? Are they going to make sure that, well, I'm going to go to, sit on a beach for 10 days first, and then I'm going to do it because I'm sort of, minimizing the chance that I would have COVID and bring it to a remote community. But again, to me, ultimately, that decision, it needs to start first and foremost, and those conversations need to start first and foremost between the travel company and the communities themselves.
And quickly, Judy, could you add on to that at all? I see you nodding your head. Do you have any quick thoughts just to add to that?
Yeah, I think communities are vulnerable at this time. And if operators are not engaging and keeping them informed, the information they have is the local information that they have received from their health authorities. It's a whole different ballgame at international travel level and what is happening and the vaccine and the risks and all that. So I think it's the responsibility of the operators to make them aware of every kind of risk that could be available for travelers coming to their areas, and understanding these risks, asking them how they think they can protect themselves to these risks if they still want to receive visitors, and working around that with them so that it becomes a win-win for everyone. But I think the ethics for it is that we need to ask. We do not assume that because they are vulnerable, they need income, we can send them people. We need to ask. Excellent.
I'm glad you ended on that. Audrey, I'm just going to touch base with you. As much as we'd like, not everyone wants to travel on group tours. Some people still want to stay in all-inclusive resorts and go on these crazy thing called cruises. Can we offer some insights and tips on how they can still benefit communities if they're traveling that way?
Get off the boat? No. No, but actually, seriously, I've never taken a cruise, but from what I understand, cruises do dock in cities, they do dock in places, and travelers do have the power when they are on land to choose experiences that are focused on the community. So maybe that does mean not a little, but maybe some more research in advance to find out what opportunities are there. Maybe it's, I don't know, a cooking class with the refugee group in Naples or, something else. But at the minimum, eat in local restaurants, figure out where the artisans are selling their work and buy directly from the local artisans. Think about taking...
Away from the ports, by the way, because most of the ports are
Exactly. Actually, one of the things I was going to say is get on land and then take a bus somewhere far away. But I know you also have to get back in the evening. And that also, the same goes for all-inclusive resorts. I mean, I know the motivation at a lot of all-inclusive resorts is to keep people there, and you've paid for it, so you think, oh, I should be here. But I mean, I don't believe that they lock you in. So you can find ways to leave. And again, do your research, figure out what's around. Ask friends, go on Google and start searching for social enterprises in Dominican Republic or wherever you are, and find ways to kind of get outside that bubble and make sure that your money is kind of going directly to the local people and the local businesses.
Excellent. I'm going to stick with you, Audrey. Just one takeaway for our audience that our audience can factor into their decision-making process when we can travel again, to ensure local communities benefit and aren't disrupted by community tourism.
So the one tip is to do your research and find, what are the community programs or what are the community tourism activities going on? And again, ask if they are open and if they're interested in tourists right now. And in terms of tourists going to visit different communities, I always say err on the side of asking questions and respect. So if something, if you're a traveler, sometimes you don't know, like, is this appropriate? Is this not appropriate? Do people like photographs? Do they not? Always err on the side. Think about asking questions like a kid, is this okay? And think about, would I want this in my community? Would I want someone doing this in my community? And that also goes for safety as well. When we think about traveling, just, to more remote places or to different communities as well. So ask questions, act with respect, and do your research to figure out kind of where the experiences are.
Okay, I got one last all-rounder. I need a quick answer from everyone because we've got to get to questions, because there's tons of great questions here from the audience, and Chris is going to come back on here and ask some questions in just 1 minute. I just want to hear from all of you and just about the future, the vision for the future of community tourism. Just a look ahead in the next 5 years. Start with you, Jamie.
I think my vision or hope is that all travel companies that claim to be responsible have integrated community tourism experiences into their product offerings. And along with that, there's a huge increase in the amount of travelers that are choosing these kinds of experiences. And the reason that they should both be doing that is because it's a better form of travel and they'll get better experiences from it.
Excellent. Judy.
I think that we will see more structured partnerships with communities in the future as responsible travel pushes the narrative of community as hosts and not as attractions, and communities as co-creators of experiences. That this will open a whole new thinking in the travel world, and businesses will start looking at communities differently. The same things we talked about. They are not places that you go to see attractions and leave some charitable donations, but they are co-creators, and you sign up partnerships with them for the long term that benefits your business and benefits that community as well. But that will take us, the industry, to believe that we need strategies, because for community tourism, a lot of businesses don't have strategies for community tourism. They do it because it's sometimes a nice thing to do, or sometimes they do it because this is what the client has asked for. But within their organizations, they don't have a strategy for community tourism. That makes their engagement, whether they like it or not, exploitative to a certain extent. That also limits the experience that their guests can have in this community, because they have not set up a strategy for this. And we know that without a strategy, we cannot tell the future.
Excellent. And Audrey.
That community tourism becomes more the norm, and that means on the side of the travelers, that's what they expect, it's what they demand, that they're also asking difficult questions like, is the money really staying in the communities? How are they benefiting? But also building on what Judy just said, that community tourism is also integrated into tour companies, and not just tour companies, but all travel companies in terms of their approach, looking at shared value with the community, with the traveler, with themselves. And ultimately that communities are the ones who are driving the tourism in their communities and deciding, this is what we want, this is how we want to develop, or maybe not develop in this way. And this is what we want to share and how we want to engage and exchange with travelers. So it comes from them ultimately.
Excellent. Chris, the magic of Chris. We need you back. There's our
I'm
mayor.
here.
All right.
I'm here and I'm
what are
like
the
not
people-
wanting this conversation to end because it's been brilliant. Like, thank you so much. So what I want to do real quick before we keep the conversation going is I do understand that we did promote this event as an hour long. And so for those of you who do need to leave, remember, we will be recording this, but I do want to leave you with some housekeeping notes and just some takeaway notes before we get into the questions. So first things first, just a massive thank you to everyone who's joined us today. And for those of you who need to leave a little bit early today, this is the latest in our Retravel Live event series where we address the most pressing topics in travel today and together look at how we can solve them so we can retravel the right way. So if you want to learn more about Retravel, you can visit retravellive.com for more details on our next event. And in addition to that, to learn more about the great work of our guests, please visit Audrey's award-winning blog at uncorneredmarket.com, Judy's impactful organization at STTA.Kenya.org. And for more information on the great work Planeterra is doing, please visit Planeterra.org. And again, we will be sharing this recording via YouTube soon. So stay tuned. Now, let's get to some questions, shall we? I'm going to kick this one off with Jamie, actually. So the question is, what can we do to support countries who rely heavily on tourism right now at this time?
That's a wow, great question. I think book travel in advance. Certainly go with companies that are offering flexible booking conditions and things like that. But bookings send a very clear message to the marketplace that you want to support them. You can also look to see if there are organizations that are supporting community tourism enterprises and experiences in those countries that you care about. As I said, a lot of the work that we're doing at Planeterra at the moment is distant learning, online training, to use this downtime as an opportunity to set these communities up to thrive when travel comes back.
Amazing. And I just want to give Judy the opportunity to build on that. You said something earlier that really resonated with me about the difference between charity and compassion. And when we're looking at it from that perspective, what can people do right now to support those countries that really need tourism?
I think it is this hibernation time for tourism is a good time to rethink tourism. You can prepare them you can support these destinations. To rethink some tourism, maybe they even have to start thinking about domestic tourism so that they can promote internal travel during this time. I was sharing with the rest of the panelists before we went live about how operators in Kenya have encouraged domestic tourism through aggressive marketing during this period from 2020 until now. And whereas it cannot equate, the revenues cannot be the same, there has been an interest from the domestic market that can be nurtured and can grow into a very formidable market going into the future, and reducing the risk of over-dependence on one market. But the most important thing for me now is for destinations to look for new possibilities. When we get into a crisis, every time we look for new possibilities. So destinations should not be looking backwards, back to what used to be, but they should look forward to what is possible and what is new, even as we wait for travel to return.
Wonderful, thank you. Bruce, I'm gonna flip the script a bit and ask you a question on this.
All right.
There are talks of some countries requiring COVID vaccines for foreign travelers. Mm-hmm. Would this help restart travel more rapidly, or does it risk being discriminatory?
Well, the equity part is a global problem, and it's a philosophical discussion to have. But will it restart travel faster? I mean, I think so, but how much faster? I mean, for us to get back to regular levels of travel, there's going to be a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term kind of goal. And I think rapid testing is equally important to than the vaccine is. I think we still don't have access to rapid testing at the moment, and make it available. And even like as an operator, if we could actually administer rapid tests and have, I mean, there's so many home tests available for so many different things. I don't know why we can't have that. It'll make things easier for everybody to be able to get moving again. But in terms of the vaccine, it's an issue for sure. I mean, we're seeing the rollout already. It's not, it's based on, governments predicting which vaccine companies to back last May, right? I mean, they funded a lot of these vaccine companies last May, June. And it was the luck of the draw. Pfizer and Moderna came out on top, and those countries that ordered advanced, doses prior win the lottery, and it shouldn't be a lottery. Luckily, we've had a change in leadership in the US, and there's a more concentrated approach and a more focused approach on addressing the issue. And I think that, and we have now leadership around the world that are now looking to and saying that, no man can be left behind when it comes to this COVID thing. One country can't be behind and everyone else be vaccinated. We all have to come out of this together. Because we saw that this virus came from, a small city and spread around the world. So we can't leave one country out. And I think that when people just grasp that, there's no choice that we have to work together, and we have to come together, and we have to create a more equitable relationship with the vaccinations globally. We just have to do it, because we need our economy to start. We need the global economy to, get back to normal. And I think that that is going to drive it, because we've seen how it can spread from a small town. Everyone has to come out of this together. So we're going to be forced into an equitable solution to this. We just don't have it right now.
Amazing. Thank you. My next question, I'm going to go to Audrey on this one. And the question is, when does the impact of community tourism become negative? And can we see signs? And how do we reverse that? How do we reverse course at that point once we start to see the signs of a negative impact?
So I think community tourism, if it's done right, meaning it is this exchange, it's driven by the community, there should be let's say stopgaps in there to say, okay, we're facing a point where maybe there's too many visitors. Here are some of the negative impacts. And what I've seen in terms of negative impacts, let's say when it hasn't really been done in that strategic way, have been when there have been too many people, and the people who have visited or the travelers are not as respectful, meaning they're not really understanding that they are in a more remote place, or perhaps they are in a more indigenous community and what that means. They're not necessarily approaching it as a learning experience. And then also from the community side is sometimes I've seen that when the places become maybe too popular or kind of too overrun, then from the community side, it becomes more of kind of, let's say, a business in terms of, okay, we got people in, we got people out, we need to kind of keep moving, that type of thing. And it loses that focus on exchange and connection, which I think is what's at the core of community tourism. In terms of kind of trying to focus on how to fix those, I think part of it is in advance, you actually try and have a strategy as opposed to just, oh, everyone come at once. But as it's happening, to really start, the community leaders and all the different stakeholders together saying, okay, what can we do now to bring back this focus on connection, this personalization, and this focus on the pride that we have, in terms of the communities of sharing their culture, sharing the food, sharing the landscapes, and bringing it back to that pride and that focus on exchange.
It's so interesting. And as somebody who's not on the panel and listening,
Mm-hmm.
right, there's one common thread. Community tourism works when you involve the community. And I think you're all weaving that into your commentary. And I think it's really incredible. Judy, is there anything you'd like to build on that? Like when does the impact of community tourism become negative? And once we start to see the signs, how can we reverse that course?
I think that it becomes negative when it does not bring pride to the entire community. It becomes negative when it creates a new class within the community, class systems that did not exist before, but have come because of tourism. When you start seeing those classes, then you know that community tourism is negative. When you start seeing a total replacement of traditional livelihoods that have supported the community over centuries being lost and exchanged by livelihoods that support tourism, then you know it has become negative. When you start seeing in-migration of other people who are now running enterprises and businesses within that community and not the local people benefiting from it, then you know that community tourism has gone wrong. If you start seeing elements of dependency on tourist arrivals, that certain things only happen during a season when tourism has come to an area, when you start noticing elements of dependency, then you know that tourism has gone wrong. When you start seeing splits in community in terms of internal community conflicts that are related to tourism, that what used to be one group has not grown and therefore opened another branch, but they've actually split because they're all trying to get something out of it, then you know that community tourism has gone wrong. Now, when you start seeing all these signs, you've got to go back to that community to ask the questions I was saying at the beginning, the engagement question. You must bring that community back together, because it's very interesting. We said it at the beginning, that within communities are sub-communities, right? So there is the homogeneous community that is maybe homogeneous by location, or they're homogeneous by tradition, or they're homogeneous by language and cultures, but within them are sub-communities. And sometimes the sub-communities are the women. Sometimes the sub-communities are the youth. Sometimes the sub-communities are the elders. Sometimes the sub-community are the community gatekeepers. So we have many sub-communities within a community. And when these sub-communities are not in agreement with the bigger engagement question and the vision for that engagement, then some of these things that I've said begin to emerge. And then you know that not everybody, not the entire community was engaged. A bigger community was engaged, but the sub-communities have been left out. So you go back and start finding out, where did the cracks happen? Did we engage everyone? Did we identify all the communities? Did we look at the interests of every sub-community? What were the women saying? Did they identify with how we engage with the community? That is how you go back to the roots again, identify everyone, and look at how to come up with a common interest for everybody.
Such a great conversation. I think we could go on forever on this topic, but for the sake of time and for all of those folks who are lending us their time, I'm going to throw one last question to this panel. And that question is, this going to be a bit of we're going to go around. And what I'd love is, give me your answer, but maybe like a shortened version of it, right? So we can go around and make sure that we get everyone with enough time. So the question is, and I'm going to start with Jamie on this one. What was the first truly authentic, community-focused, or regenerative travel experience you had that made you realize the importance and power of the movement? In other words, what was the aha moment?
All right, this wasn't in the notes. Goodness gracious, I don't know off the top of my head, and isn't that interesting? I will say that I was as young as 7 years old when I first was taken abroad, but on a trip by my grandmother to what was the old Yugoslavia. And it was a very traditional sun, sea, sand, out of the UK kind of a trip. And the most fun I had was hanging out with the guy who ran the little, it looked a little bit like a New York hot dog stand. It was a little stand, and he sold bubble gum. And I that's the most I remember of my first international trip, was not the hanging out on the beach or being with my family. It was hanging out with this guy who was selling bubble gum in the back of the hotel. And I think that's where my journey started, of realizing that what I was most passionate about was learning from and creating relationships with local people.
Amazing, thanks. Audrey, I'm gonna simplify the question just a little bit because Jamie just did a great job of highlighting his aha moment. We're talking about community tourism. When was the moment where it all clicked? What was the experience that you're like, yeah, this is how it should be?
Yeah, actually, like my mind just had like all these different images come to like at the same time. So I don't necessarily know if it's like when it actually clicked, but I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Estonia for 2 years, many moons ago. And I think for me, that was actually the whole idea of community and travel and businesses, and actually also local governments working together for shared benefit. That's where it clicked, because I lived in a small community and I saw the impact that even really small things had on people's lives, whether it was money or visitors coming in who were amazed about their local culture and their folk songs, and what that instilled in terms of pride, and then also what the travelers took home with them, which was a story that they'll share forever, but that connection to those people in that place.
I love it. Thank you so much. Bruce, what was your aha moment?
Well, I have to say, when I went backpacking in 1990, the famous story, but I came back and started Gadventures because of that. So I guess most people just say, this is an interesting moment. I came back and started a company. Yeah, it really was, because when I wanted to go traveling, there was no options. I mean, you either went on a cruise or a coach or a compound resort, and I didn't want to do that back in 1990. And the only other option was getting a guidebook and doing it yourself. And I just remember having, a $5 a day budget, just having the most amazing experiences and seeing these tourist buses go by and thinking, these sterilized environments that they're creating for those tourists, they're not seeing anything, what this real country is, what this country is really about. And that was my aha moment. I came back and started G. So, but that was my first interaction. I also got, in legal trouble a couple times on that trip. If you read my book, Loop Tale, you hear all about it. But it was that experience on the road that was my aha moment to start G, but also my first real community experience. And I think the original promoters of community tourism, without even knowing it, were the original backpackers that spent money and gave money in hand as they travel, whether it was to taxi drivers, to restaurants, to different shops, and traveling and staying in small family-run bed and breakfast type hotels. That's was my, and I wanted to kind of commercialize that, and that's 30 years later, here we are.
Thanks. And Judy, what about you? What was your aha moment? When did it all click that community tourism was a really good thing?
Mine is very different from everyone. I wasn't out traveling when this happened. I was in the line of duty. When this happened, I was working for a conservation organization, and I was working in the tourism department, and part of my job was listening to complaints that were coming from the customers or clients of the conservation organization, a national. And one time, a group of Maasais came to the organization, and they were pretty angry. And they were pretty angry because they lived on the edge of one of the parks that raised the most money for the National Conservation Organization. And they were totally deprived of any opportunities of that tourism. And that day, they came because there had been a predation. There had been a predation on their livestock. They are pastoralists, and this is their livelihood. This is their life. This is their bank account. Their bank account had been raided that night, and they came with a cry. And the response that they were given was a piece of legislation to tell them, this is what the law says. There is no compensation for human-wildlife conflict that involves predation of livestock, because that had been removed from the act. So what is supposed to be a relationship, an emotional relationship with people who live on the edge of the pack, who have opened their boundaries and homes and land for wildlife to roam freely, when they have an interaction with wildlife, which is a negative interaction, we pick up a piece of legislation and tell them that, sorry, but there is nothing that we can do about it. I started to think from that day that there has to be a different and a better way that tourism can relate with communities, and communities can and should benefit from tourism. That was my aha moment. And to date, I keep saying there is a better way.
4 really incredible aha moments that speak to 4 different journeys and experiences. And I think that really is the power of community tourism, right? We've all got different perspectives, but we're all kind of in this together. Thank you so much for answering the questions. I'm going to go back into the mountains, pass it over to Bruce to wrap this up. But thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for those who stayed online with us. I tried to keep it within time and we went over, and I still don't think we got to everything. This has been such a phenomenal discussion. Thank you, Jamie, Judy, and Audrey for your different perspectives. You know, I'll just end. I'm not going to go on a long speech here, but I'm just going to end with, you know, for far too long, tourism has been a one-way conversation. It's been, and it's what, you know, people can take from another country. And if you pay for a holiday, you somehow deserve to be served. And travel is a privilege that very few of us on the planet actually have. When you look at the amount of people that have the ability to use disposable income to take a vacation every year. And it's a privilege and not a right. And I've been saying, you know, this for 30 years with travel. Just because you pay for a luxury holiday doesn't mean you deserve or you have a right to anything. Whether that's, you know, a thread count on sheets, or whether it's, you know, amenities to occupy you, to make you feel like you never left home. It's the exact opposite of where travel should be. And for far too long, travel has been a one-way conversation. And for us at Gadventures, community tourism is about bringing everyone into the conversation, creating dialogue and making sure everybody benefits. When you decide that you want to travel, the power and the privilege that you have to say, I want to go on holiday tomorrow is it's a huge responsibility. And it'll be my kind of lifelong, you know, goal, and Gadventures, you know, beyond my life, it'll be Gadventures, you know, mission to make sure people understand the power that they have and the extreme privilege that you have when you can just say, I want to go away, I want to go on vacation. And when you make that decision, the power that you have in your hands makes all the difference and can transform the world and take the travel industry from being a one-way conversation to one of the most transformative industries in the world. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, everybody. This has been amazing. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks, guys. Cheerio.
Bye, thank you.